right now. So there are record levels of anxiety and depression, and we all know, especially as coaches, that so many people are struggling right now. So your role as a coach is really more important now than it's ever been. So we're so excited to be able to dig into this topic of how to enhance your own well-being. Specifically, Gallup, I'm sure as coaches, many of you stay up on Gallup and the research that Gallup does worldwide. And we all know that Gallup has been taking a look at engaged workers for a long time, and how do we engage people in their work, and also how do we make sure that people are thriving in their life. And so Gallup has actually found a distinction. You can still be an engaged worker, if you will, but yet not be thriving and flourishing in your life. And in fact, I wanted to share some interesting statistics with you. Gallup recently discovered that engaged workers who are not thriving in their lives have 61% higher likelihood of burnout, 48% higher likelihood of daily stress, 66% higher likelihood of daily worry, and double the rate of daily sadness and anger. So all of that to say, this topic of your personal well-being, especially as a coach, is really more important now than it's ever been. So it's really our hope that you walk away from this time together feeling not only encouraged and motivated, but really equipped with some practical things that you can do in your life and in your coaching practice to make your own well-being a priority. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to dive in here. Can you all see that? Are we, Amber, thumbs up? Great. Okay, and so as we dive in, I really want to encourage you to put the lens on yourself for this next time together. We'll be together for about an hour, as Amber said, and it can be so easy, especially as coaches, sometimes with our own coaching practice and a lot to do, or also just for the mere fact that we really care deeply about our clients. It can be so easy to put everybody else ahead of ourselves, to kind of put our own well-being on the back burner sometimes. But I'm sure we've all heard the adage, you can't give away what you don't have. And so I really encourage you to lean into this time and put the lens on yourself, because if you think about it, any type of transformation that you want to see in your clients or even in the world, it really starts with you. It starts with us as coaches. So lean in, take this time to think about, who you are as a coach. What is the unique value that you can bring to your clients, and where are you at with your own well-being? So we're going to have, as Amber said, some time of Q&A at the end. We will have some interaction in the chat though as well. And we really just want to encourage you. Valerie and I will be asking some questions. I know Todd's going to be doing the same and taking you through an exercise. So we encourage you to answer in the chat and interact in the chat as we go through this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Valerie, and we're going to be diving in right away at what is well-being anyway.
All right. What is well-being? Well, most of us as coaches know that your wellness is important. And the confusing part between wellness and well-being is that wellness is typically related to physical aspects of your life. And so when we talk about well-being, we are talking about a combination of, and this is defined by Gallup, by the way, a combination of our love for what we do each day, our quality of our relationships, the security of our finances, the vibrancy of our physical health, and the pride we take in what we have contributed to our community. And so the important thing to know about well-being is that it can be drastically improved. And so that's why we're here today, to talk about what is well-being, and as coaches, what can we do to improve that, both for ourselves and our clients and communities. During this, preparing for this presentation, I also came across the book from Gallup called Wellbeing, the 5 Essential Elements. And in the book is a well-being finder. So it's a assessment similar to the Gallup Strengths Finder, and you take the assessment and you get a report on your well-being and the 5 elements. And so it's really exciting and a resource that I think is good for everyone to take and assess their own individual well-being. The 5 essential elements identified in the book are career, community, financial, physical, and social. And Genny and I don't have near enough time today to talk about all 5 of those things. And so we will be focusing on career and community. And so Genny, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Valerie. So as we dive in, again, a reminder to put the lens back on yourself, not only as a coach, but just as an individual, because when you prioritize your own well-being, and I recognize, Valerie just talked about those 5 different areas of well-being. We're going to touch on 2 of those. Your priority may be in one of the other areas because we're all different. We're all coming from a different place as well, and the things that we need to work on our life. But I encourage you to prioritize your own well-being, because when we do that, it helps us to take better care of ourselves. It helps us to have the opportunity to grow, because when you're flourishing and you're thriving in your life, that's when you're really open to, and that's when you really have the opportunity to grow. And then it helps you to give of yourself. And what I mean by that is, again, it goes back to, you can't give away what you don't have. So really focusing on being a healthy individual as a coach, not only in your career, but in your life as well. And as Valerie said, the good news is that Gallup has found that our well-being can improve, and it can actually improve really quickly. And the 2 ways that it can improve, they point out, is it's by the situations that we put ourselves in and by the people that we surround ourselves with. So Valerie and I are going to dig down a little bit into more nuts and bolts on what are some practical things you can do in those 2 areas to really improve your personal well-being. So touching on career well-being, we all spend a lot of time at work or working. And as coaches, as I mentioned, especially if you have your own coaching practice and maybe you're managing the business all on your own, or you're trying to grow your own coaching practice, or it's the fact that you deeply care about your clients. Sometimes it's hard to have the, turn that switch off. Really focusing on your career well-being can be especially important. And so Gallup defines, what is career well-being? It's basically that you like what you do every day. So ask yourself, think about your coaching practice, think about your role as a coach. Do you like what you do every day? And Gallup further defines that people with a high level of career well-being, they wake up every morning with something to look forward to doing that day. They have the opportunity to use their strengths each day, and they feel like they're making progress. So keeping that in mind, I would love for you to just put some thoughts in the chat. Think about your role as a coach. Think about all of the different things that you do in your role as a coach, whether that's working with clients, whether that's in your coaching practice in general. And I would love to hear, what do you enjoy most about your role as a coach? What parts of your role give you the most energy? So if you can just throw some of those things in the chat right now, I'd love to see some of your thoughts on that, some of your feedback. Learning every day, love it. What other things do you love about being a coach? Connecting with others. The spark in the eyes of clients when it happens, helping people, when a client has success, connection, being able to lift people up, seeing transformation. Yeah, such good. Being a contribution. Oh, I love the participation. Thank you so much for sharing. Client breakthroughs. There's another learning every day. So yeah, so I think we have, and I see a lot of common threads too, that we as coaches probably share as far as things that we're really passionate about. So when we think about focusing on and improving your career well-being, what's really important is to think about those things that energize you, those things that you love doing as really your starting point, because those are the things that once you identify them, you can be more intentional about creating opportunities for those things, which then contribute to your overall career well-being. But I want to take it to even more of a granular level and just give you some really practical, probably reminders, because all of you as coaches, I want to touch on this topic of strengths. I'm sure many of you are, even encourage your clients to be thinking about and understanding their strengths, whether taking them through strengths assessments and that sort of a thing. So I know this topic of strengths for coaches is very, very familiar. But the reason that I bring it up is just to ask all of us, kind of challenge all of us to be thinking, as far as our career well-being, do we really know our strengths, and are we using our strengths every day in our coaching practice? So there's an individual named Marcus Buckingham. Some of you might be familiar with him. He does a lot of strengths work, but he's a New York Times bestselling author. But he has a quote that I love, and he says, "We're often more fearful of our weaknesses than we are honoring of our strengths." And I love that, because I think it's an important reminder that sometimes we really do tend to focus on our weaknesses and, oh, we need to improve this about our coaching practice, or we want to be better at this. And certainly growing and learning and all of that is really good, but also to be just a reminder for you as a coach to think about, what are your strengths, and are you honoring those strengths? Are you using those strengths in your coaching practice? So I would love to even see in the chat, how many of you, and it's probably so many, but how many of you have done a formal strengths assessment? And if you have, you can even put Gallup or VIA or whatever that might be in the chat. So how many of you have done a formal strengths assessment where you really know your strengths? Yep, Gallup, VIA, yes. So this is an area we're really familiar with, but here's another question I would love to get your feedback on, and just to see your answers in the chat as well. How many of you then have filed away those results from Gallup or whatever it might be and forgotten it? Or how many of you really feel like you are using your strengths in your coaching practice? So maybe type in, yes, you're using them, or filed away, need to pull them back out. So I see yes, using daily. Try to use, but forget from time to time, retake it, regularly use, yes. Okay. So a lot of yes, using your strengths. So for those of you who maybe that's not your answer, where this is just, let's serve as a reminder that we all have strengths. And when you are using your strengths, and this is again from Gallup, they have found that you will be more productive, have a higher level of profitability, and 3 times more likely to enjoy quality of life. So as a coach, when you're thinking about career well-being and you're thinking about loving what you do every day, just an important reminder to really know and use and honor your strengths. And the other thing that I want to share, and this is something that I find that we don't think of this as often, but honor your experiences. So we all go through experiences, and we go through them differently. And even if you and I go through the same exact experience, we're going to experience it differently because we're different people, right? And so we go through failures, we go through successes, we go through, professional things, personal things. We might think it's a big deal, we might think it's small, but our experiences often shape us and uniquely equip us for what we're doing in our coaching practice, or what we could be doing. And so this is just a reminder to think about, again, wanting to improve or increase your overall career well-being. Think about the experiences that you've been through, and then you can use those experiences to, when we honor our experiences, we can better connect who we are to what we do. And so just to share, there's a couple of things on that slide from a personal standpoint. I have on there Courage Worldwide. So I do primarily coaching with women, and Courage Worldwide, I used to be communications for a nonprofit that rescued girls out of trafficking. And that experience impacted me profoundly. It was one of my top shaping experiences, and really fueled my passion to come alongside women and really help them find their voice. And so that's really connecting one of my experiences in my life to the work that I do in coaching women today. So the other one, that's just a picture of, women in community. And that really is representative of something that you might think is a small experience that shaped me, but it actually was one of those kind of epiphany moments for me where, so I live in Boise, Idaho, born and raised in California in the US, and my husband's job got transferred about 7 years ago now. And so we up and moved our 2 kiddos here to the Idaho area. And I just knew nobody, was totally starting over. My husband had to travel right after we moved here. And I remember I was sitting in our front office and I was looking out our front window, and I saw these women fast walking all together in community down the street right in front of my house. And they were laughing and talking. And I just started crying because I was craving community and I was so lonely. And that just lit a fire in me to really start building new community in my area. And that experience and having the feeling of not having community fuels a lot of the work that I do today, trying to build community and even group workshops with women and things like that. So I share those personal examples just to show you what this can play out and what it might look like in your own life, but really take time to think about what are the experiences that have shaped you and how does that uniquely equip you and prepare you for what you could be doing or are doing in your coaching practice. Because again, that can better connect who you are to what you do, and that can contribute to your career well-being. So I have one more just practical tip, and in just a couple minutes, I'm going to turn it back over to Valerie. Other things to think about as coaches that can impact your career well-being. One is emotional intelligence. Just asking yourself and checking in, how are you in the area of EQ? How do you process and express your emotions, self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal relationships, things like that. And the other is growth versus fixed mindset. You know, and this is really, do you view things as mistakes or opportunities? Good news is we can improve in both of these areas. And I just showed this slide to say it's a great opportunity as we're thinking about our personal well-being, and specifically as it relates to your career, checking in on both these things and just asking yourself, are there any areas that I might need to work on, I might need to improve in? And then my last reminder on this is to just, because I even know I just gave you a lot kind of drinking through a fire hose, and Valerie's going to share information and Todd's going to share information. And really, I want to encourage you that as you take all of this information from today, and as you really prioritize and think about your own well-being, to just take small steps. And I think so often we put pressure on ourselves, especially as coaches who are helping other people, to go from A to Z overnight, or we have to feel like we have to be perfect and have it all figured out. And so I just share this slide to say small steps are a big deal. 1% better every day. I think that comes from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, which I would highly recommend, but just taking one small step after the other one small step. So whatever area of well-being you're wanting to work on, really being content with those small steps, because those small steps are a big deal because they add up over time. So don't put too much pressure on yourself. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Valerie.
Wonderful. All right. So as we talk about community well-being, it's interesting from my standpoint, because Genny, to hear the story and her experience of being lonely and creating community in her relationships, Genny is my coach. And so it was through coaching with Genny that I came up with my company name, Creative Connections, because I was craving connections. And this was before the pandemic. So I attribute my experience of creating an organization and the company name to Genny. So thank you, Genny. So my question to you is, as a coach, do you have meaningful connections and relationships in your life? And so that's where we're going to start with the community well-being question. Let's see, Genny. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right. So as you read this slide, I'd like you to think of what words might fit into the blanks, because I'll go ahead and share those. But I really would like your perception of what words might fit in the blank. Balance. I love that. I'll go a combination. Ooh, I like that. So I'll go ahead and read the definition. Community well-being is the culmination or combination of social, economic, environmental, cultural, and political conditions identified by individuals and their communities as essential for them to flourish and fulfill their potential. And so as you think about those words, combination, conditions, flourish, fulfill, those are all things we all want, as do our coaching clients. And so as you think about community well-being, thinking outside of the neighborhood you live, but the people you surround yourself with, the village, if you will, that we all want to be a part of. So community as a whole Thank you. Looking at community as a whole, 3 attributes play a large role in well-being: connectedness, livability, and equity. Connection is fostered by a community's social networks. A livable community is supported by the infrastructure, and an equitable community is supported by values of diversity, social justice, and individual empowerment. So I just love the words of empowerment, infrastructure, connection. Fostering those things are, I think, what makes our community relationships so valuable. So how do our social networks affect well-being? We are social creatures. We live in community, and our individual health and well-being is intricately tied to the health of our communities and our interactions with others. And so when you talk about health, you generally think of emotional health or my mental health, but this is encompassing all of those 5 things that we talked about are a part of our community. And so what is social capital? So our social capital lets us do more. So I sort of see this as this is the ROI of your relationships. This is the return on your investment in enhancing and growing those interpersonal relationships. So our social networks offer our benefits, not just for us as individuals in the network, but for the community. They foster trust and mutuality. They facilitate the flow of humanity and generosity, and they promote better public health. So that's the benefits of our social networks, if you will. And boosting your community well-being. As a coach, now is the time to recalculate your opportunities. And we were talking about recalculating, I think as far back as in March. And we talked about, before the days of having maps on your cell phones, we used what was called a GPS. And our GPS in our family, it was a female voice, and you could almost hear her sigh when you went a different way than she explained you should be going. And she would sigh and then say, recalculating, as if it were a bad thing that you were trying a new route. And so one of the things I want to make sure that we all do as coaches is make sure you have plenty of gas in your tank before you leave, and then try new ways, try different opportunities, take a different route. It's fun to get your GPS to say recalculating often, just because you're trying something new. And so what I would like to do now is to talk about 3 things that you can do to boost your community well-being. Identify how you can contribute to your community based on your personal mission. Tell people about your passions so they can connect you with relevant groups and causes, and join a community group or event. Even if you start small, start now. Small steps are a big deal, like Genny said. All right, Genny, this is you.
Thank you, Valerie. So really, we just encourage you, and we'll pass the baton over to Todd in just a second here. We really just encourage you to continue the momentum, really thinking about not only the 2 areas that Valerie and I briefly touched on, and my goodness, we could probably spend an entire day really digging into this topic of well-being, but we encourage you to think about those other areas as well. Continue the momentum. Here are some great resources. We've got the book on there that you could probably just take a screenshot even of this, that Valerie mentioned, and then there's a new book that just came out from Gallup, Wellbeing at Work, How to Build Resilient and Thriving Teams. There's Valerie's contact information on there, my contact information as well. Please feel free to reach out, even aside from this, with any questions that you might have on any of this. And with that, I will go ahead and stop. Valerie, anything else you want to include before I close out this?
No, just the ICF High Country website is on there as well, and that's a great resource if you're interested in learning more and expanding your communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, we'll pass it over.
I'll take myself off mute as well. Well, thank you so much, Valerie and Genny. It was great to go through that with you today. And thank you for everyone joining today. On behalf of ICF High Country, welcome to our chapter International Coaching Week. This is our first session of the week, and so thank you very much for joining from all over the world. That really makes it exciting for us. So can everybody see my slides? Awesome, great. So I am going to continue on that focus of the lens on yourself, and the transformation starts with you, just as Genny and Valerie had talked about. We will kind of change gears a little bit. There's going to be an exercise of for you to participate on chat as we go through this today. As Amber mentioned in my introduction, that I coach to the work of Byron Katie. And I don't know if many of you have heard of her before. She's written several books, and she does webinars often, going through the work. And a lot of things that I talk about today can be found on her website called thework.com. And so I'm going to walk you through that today. One of the things that Byron Katie says that our parents, our children, our spouses, and I'm going to add in our clients and our friends, will continue to press every button we have until we realize that what it is that we don't want to know about ourselves yet. They will point out to our freedom every time. And so finding that freedom is really going through what is called the work. And the work consists of 4 questions and turnarounds. And we're going to experience that today. Because when we are, as coaches, just like Genny and Valerie were saying, that we want to make sure that we are improving ourselves so that we can help our clients improve. But oftentimes, there's sometimes when our clients, or whether it's our parents or children or spouses or whatever, they create this anxiety in us, and sometimes inhibits our ability to really perform the way that we would like to, or can, or have done in the past. And so for this exercise today, as we go through these 4 questions together, I would like you to think of a client, or it could be a family member, a child, or spouse, or whatever. But in this exercise, I'm going to be focusing on the client, because we are focusing on the well-being of coaches, ourselves as coaches today. So think of a client that in some way, somehow, just kind of irritates you a little bit. Or there's something that you're not happy with, you're unsatisfied with. So picture that person in your mind. And then think of a situation of when you first believed the thought that they were that way, whether it was in a coaching session or whether they didn't show up or whatever. And I would like you to think of a thought that's something like this. And when you have your sentence, which we call a one-liner, I'd like you to type that in the chat. So my client should blank. And I put shouldn't also. I'll be focusing on should for the exercise, but sometimes it's like my client shouldn't miss our appointments. That might be the one. My client should listen. My client should be more focused. Great, I like that. So go ahead and put that in the chat, and when you have your one-liner, and I want you to really think of that situation when you first believed that thought. So whether it is my client should listen, or listen to me, or be more focused, or something like that. So go ahead and think of that, whether even if it's a child or a parent or a spouse. My client should be consistent. I like that. have ambitions. Nice. Follow up. My client should follow up with committed time frames. Should show up on time. Yes, that's a good one. They should open up. Be more vulnerable. Okay, great. So I want you to hold that thought that you have in your mind. You can even write it down if you want. My client shouldn't blank. And then we're going to go through these 4 questions that Byron Katie has put together in the work. And this is kind of just a really quick example of how the work can work for you. And so the first question we're going to do, and it's just a very simple yes or no. Is it true? So my client should open up, or my client should not be lazy. Is it true? Go ahead and type your answer in the chat. And it's just a simple yes or no, and there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just an invitation to notice, is it true? Okay, we have a yes and a yes with a smile. Should be more committed. Okay. Great. If any of you answered no to this question, that's fine. Just hold off till we get to number 3. But if you answered yes, which is most often, even when I do the work myself, it is yes. Second question is just an opportunity to notice again, can you absolutely know that it's true? My client should be committed to growth. Can I absolutely know that's true? And again, it's just a simple yes or no, and neither right or wrong. It's just an opportunity to notice. Now, number 3, this is where we're going to spend a little bit of time here. So again, think of that moment when you first thought your client should blank. Where were you? Just visualize yourself there. And then think, how do you react when you believe the thought? And again, type in your answers in the chat. What emotions come up? For me, so like if I think of my client should not miss their appointments, you know, I get a little bit angry, frustrated, and like that I become defensive. I roll my eyes. I stop respecting her. Yeah, irritated, frustrated, sad, pissed, frustration. Yeah, how do you react when you believe that thought? What do you see? What images come up for you in that moment? Annoyed. How do you see the client? So the client, they should show up, or they are not committed to growth. My client should commit to growth, or whatever that is. How do you see that client in that moment? How do you see them? One of them had already mentioned, like, stop respecting her. How do you see that client? You're sad for the person. You're tense, disorganized. And then just notice when you have those thoughts and how you see that client, whether it's like you're sad, you see them as disorganized, how do you treat them? How do you treat them when you believe that thought in that moment? So the stop respecting her is a great example of how you treat them. I look down upon them sometimes. I will disregard them, ignore them, those types of things, which, you know, As a coach, it's really not the best thing to do, but we're human and sometimes we do those things. Now we're going to go to the fourth question. Again, I invite you back to that time when you first believed that thought. Who would you be without that thought? You're placing that thought aside and you're imagining a space. Maybe that client didn't show up for that appointment, but it never occurs to you that they should show up. Who would you be without that thought? You try to listen to them. Be compassionate, less judgmental. Who else would you be? What does that future look like as well? When we imagine, sometimes this is really difficult to imagine that space because sometimes we get so wound up in that thought. But that thought is only a thought and it's in our imagination. And so it's really that invitation to really go into a separate space and imagine without that thought. More understanding, more present, more engaging, and more giving. Oftentimes the question that Byron Katie, she goes by Katie. It's like Byron Kathleen something Mitchell. She has a long name, but she goes by Katie mostly. And so she'll say, what would kindness do in that moment? So more present, more understanding, more engaging, empathetic. And then how do you see that client in that moment without the thought? Better listener, more hearing. How do you see the client? And then also, how would you treat the client without that thought? So now after we've done these 4 questions, we go into what are called the turnarounds. And the turnarounds is when we take that original statement and we turn it around to see if there's anything that is true or truer in that moment. And Katie calls it like trying on shoes. And it may not work, but it might. And so the first turnaround is when we turn this around to ourselves and we own it. So if my sentence is, my client should listen to me, the turnaround would be, I should listen to me. And so take your original statement and turn it around to you. Take the client out, completely out of your thought, and turn that around. And so I should be more vulnerable, or I should not pay attention to others' feedbacks. I should have less fear. And then just ask yourself, how is that true or truer in that moment? So for me, my client should listen to me. If I turn this around and I think I should listen to me, then I should listen to the chatter and the me trying to infer things on my client. And in coaching, that's really not a competency at all. We shouldn't be inferring things. We should just allow the client be who they are. And so I should listen to me. Now, the other turnaround would be the opposite. The opposite turnaround is my client shouldn't listen to me. How is that true or truer in that moment? And so this is my client shouldn't listen to me. Well, my perception is that they didn't in that moment. And so that's the reality. And Katie has a great quote. She says, when we argue with reality, we lose. So the reality is my client didn't listen. They did their own thing. That's the reality. And then the last one is the opportunity to switch it. And it's, I should listen to my client. And how is that true or truer? And in coaching, for me, you know, based upon the ICF competencies, that we should listen to our clients. And it's also an opportunity for me to grow and understand. And so that's an example of the work, a very quick and shortened version of it. I get to every day see people wake up to their frustrations and things that have been bothering them. And I hope that you've got a glimpse of that today. Another quote by Baron Katie says, everyone is a mirror image of yourself, your own thinking coming back at you. And it really is our thinking that that's in our minds and in our thoughts. And so if we question them, it brings us a lot of freedom. And so thank you very much for your time today. Loving What Is Baron Katie's book that she has several books out, but that's her main book that talks about the work. Highly recommend reading this book if you're interested more. You can also find everything I talked about today on thework.com. There's what is called a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. And if we had had time today, this is what I do with my clients. I go through and fill out a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. And then we go through the work with that Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. And so there is also my website and my contact information. And thank you very much for your participation. That was fantastic participation. I really hope that you got a glimpse of just questioning our thoughts, especially in number 4, of who we'd be without that thought and what freedom arises from that and how much that makes us feel better. And if we feel better, then we can definitely, our clients feel better. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amber, and we're going to go into a Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Valerie and Genny. That was awesome. I know I have lots of thoughts and reactions coming up. How about you guys? Any questions that you want to give to one of our presenters here? Or maybe even just a comment or something to explore further? You can sort of unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it in the chat, whatever feels more comfortable.
Hi, this is Grażyna from Poland.
Hello.
A few words from me. Thank you, Ted, for bringing that book, Baron Katie. I actually have read it or audio listen some times ago, and I was wondering, you know, where do I know those questions? And I know at the time I did it, it was very powerful, and they still are. So I believe in those questions, and that could be also one of the tools you could use as coach if that resonates with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It is, and you know, I was a certified coach, leader coach before I became certified in the work, and it's just because I found the work so liberating, and I was using it sometimes when I would be coaching leaders. And so yes, it's a phenomenal tool just to bring in and just do a quick inquiry with your clients as well. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Any other questions or thoughts?
So there's a question it says, kindly share the assessment link. Is that referring to what Valerie talked about? Agata in the chat. Okay, yeah, Valerie, would you mind sharing that link again on that assessment?
Absolutely. I'll share the link right now.
I was wondering, Todd, does Katie talk about, or in your work, have you ever thought about, even switching that up for our own self, right? Stuff we struggle with, like I need to give more space for silence, or I am always thinking, I don't know, like if we can go through that just for our own wellness, our own self could be a useful tool as well.
That's a very good question, Amber. Katie always highly recommends that we first do the work on others. We can do what we call an I statement, like I should blank, I should this. It is a little bit harder to do that, especially at first. And so the recommendation is always to do it on other people, because we really are working on ourselves when we do that. It's not the other person, it's just really ourselves. But that's a question I get all the time, and it does work. I'm actually going through this other course with another coach, and it is really working on I statements, or our beliefs about certain things. And so it can be done. It is just recommended to start with others.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We transfer a lot onto our clients, right? So it can bring that to awareness.
Yeah. This is also questions for Genny and Valerie as well. So for their presentation that they had, this is an opportunity to ask them questions as well.
Actually, I have one more question. Any particular circumstances you would recommend these kind of questions in coaching?
Yes, if you're really familiar, I really highly recommend like understanding, like reading the book, Loving What Is, watching some videos of Byron Katie do the work, so that you can understand how you can bring this into your practice. I went through a 12-month program to become certified in the work, but it is something that I started to do before I became certified in with people, just because those questions are pretty simple, and you have that foundation of a coach. And so, is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? And going in those questions, yeah, just bringing that in and coaching that to your clients, absolutely. It can really bring wonders in. Does that answer your question?
I was more interested in if there is any particular type of a dilemma, problem of a coachee when this tool would be especially powerful.
Okay, all right. So there was a few times, especially when I was in HR, and was in the corporate world, like an eBay and so forth, where somebody that I'd be coaching would be having this issue with a particular coworker or a boss or just somebody in the work environment. And then I would go through those questions with them. Or if you are doing coaching, and sometimes, their personal lives come into it, like their spouse or their child comes into the coaching session, just going through those, answering those questions real quick, kind of frees that space up for what the client does want to work on.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. I see a hand up. Is it Lorianne?
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
I had a question for Genny. You talk about the emotional intelligence, but you had to go quick because of time constraint. I don't know if you can deepen a bit more on this topic.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. And when we're thinking about emotional intelligence, and gosh, there are so many good resources out there. There's actually one that you can find on LinkedIn, Dr. Travis Bradbury. It's Bradberry. And he is continually posting articles on emotional intelligence. And he's really good at doing quick articles on tips you can do to improve, things you can do to improve your own emotional intelligence. But when you're looking at emotional intelligence without getting into it with too much detail, really just thinking about how do you process your own emotions, and do you have a good understanding of that? And then how are you expressing those emotions, which touch on different areas, even things like how do you tolerate stress? What is your decision making? And so the good thing with emotional intelligence, and there are assessments that you can do, both Valerie and I are certified in this, and we are able to do assessments. And you can even go on and do little free assessments, of course, if you want as well. But the really key thing is once you start to understand your own level of emotional intelligence and maybe different areas that you may need to work on, say maybe that's my self-regard. Maybe I have a lower self-regard than how others tend to see me. Maybe it's my self-expression. Maybe how I'm expressing things is having a reaction with people that might be less than desirable. So the more you really understand your emotional intelligence, the more you can do to improve it. And that's the exciting thing, is that it can be improved. And so it really starts with that awareness. So does that answer your question at all?
It does. It does. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions or comments? Let me scroll through here. I was thinking, Genny and Valerie, we have a couple minutes. How do you think a coach could step back, and what might they be seeing that could maybe have them ask themselves, am I needing to be more connected?
Valerie, I'll let you take that one.
I think that it falls both under the social as well as the community. The connection is the one thing that the networking and the relationships, the interpersonal relationships, I think are significant, and they're significant from the standpoint of both the well-being assessment as well as the emotional intelligence assessment. Many of the things in the emotional intelligence assessment are related to social connections, independence, but independence in the fact that you still need interactions to be independent, because you need to have somebody in a relationship that you can demonstrate that independence. And so I found that was interesting when we did our EQ assessments, emotional intelligence assessments on ourselves, Genny and I, last year. And then when you look at other individuals as well. And I think, the pandemic made it especially difficult. We weren't able to connect. We had Zoom fatigue. We didn't get the emotional experiences engaging and things that some of us were very dependent upon. And so I think more than ever, being mindful of calling it radical collaboration. I mean, how can we connect? What are the opportunities to do that? And it's quite frankly been, we've had to rely on technology.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry to interrupt, because I realize I have some hand in, Ozel. We have like a minute left. Hand in if you have a question or comment for our speakers.
Yeah, super quickly. I was really inspired by that 4 questions. And I wonder, could they also be used, or how, in family and friend conversations, or what would be a kind of a softer version so that they are not that intimidating in such relationships?
Good question. That's a tough one. I've had because in coaching, when we sit down with a client, we are in that prepared space and ready and alert to, as like a client, and to go through this coaching session. And so in social, it's a little bit harder because of that space. I would say I don't use it in social gatherings, even like with people I might joke with them, like, is it true? Or who would you be without the thought? Or jump to the turnaround real quick with them if they are familiar with the work. But I personally don't use it in social gatherings. I think other people do, but that's just me.
Mhm.
There was one question in the chat for Genny and Valerie real quick. Where does psychology or mental well-being fit into the Gallup assessments?
Valerie, do you want me to take that?
Sure.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have a very formal answer to that necessarily, but one of the things that I really appreciate about all of the work that Gallup has done is really connecting back to who we are as individuals and really unearthing your innate talents, which applies to us as coaches as well, which deeply connects to our psychology and our well-being. So I know for me as a coach, one of the things that was really empowering, even just doing the Gallup full 34 strengths assessment, which I'm sure many of you have done, is really being able to say, okay, well, here is what this assessment says about my strengths. You know, how am I reacting to this? But then, you know, are these truly my strengths? Which really, I felt like they really connected to innately how I think and show up and act and behave, but then to be able to harness those in my coaching practice. And even when we're thinking about career well-being and overall mental health, for me, those times of when I'm leaning into my strengths and when I'm knowingly using my strengths, it's when I'm in my strength zone and I can feel that and I can feel my overall, it's good for my mental health and my overall well-being. I can feel that increasing when I'm able to show up and fully be who I am and use that in my coaching practice. So I'm not sure if that's the exact answer you were looking for, but I definitely see them deeply connected. And Valerie, if you want to add anything to that, please, by all means.
Oh, that's good.
Thanks very much for that, Genny and Valerie.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We're at time, and just want to thank you all for your presence and making this such a robust, wonderful discussion. Thank you, Genny, Valerie, and Todd, for your you're bringing us your wisdom and your thoughts for taking care of ourselves as we launch this week. So hope to see you all throughout the week. Hope you all reach out in LinkedIn or stay connected as well. That would be wonderful. So take good care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Amber, thank you for facilitating, and thank you everybody for attending.